My life changed dramatically one autumn afternoon 10 years ago. A male customer visited my small gift shop, Little Treasures, which had just opened on a quiet street in Boston. That was how I met my husband, Thomas. He was gazing intently at a vintage clock displayed on the shop's weathered wooden shelves. The clock was from the 1920s and had just been repaired to working condition. Thomas reached out to touch it and said in a quiet voice, "This clock is magnificent. The way it keeps marking time reminds me somehow of life itself." In that moment, I was drawn to his intellectual charm. Though he exuded the sophistication of an account manager at a major advertising agency in his expensive suit, there was something endearingly pure, almost childlike, in the way he was captivated by the old clock. From that day on, Thomas made sure to visit the shop at least once a week. He would bring coffee after work, and during quiet moments between customers, we would discuss the allure of antiques and life in general. His gentlemanly demeanor and profound knowledge gradually opened my heart. After 6 months of dating, we got married. The ceremony was held in a small church with only our closest friends and family. Thomas's mother, Martha, welcomed me warmly as her own daughter from the very beginning. "I'm so happy that someone as kind as you has become Thomas's life partner," she said, embracing me with tears in her eyes, a moment I still remember vividly. After marriage, we settled in Newton, a suburb of Boston. Our white colonial-style house symbolized the beginning of our new life together. Thomas threw himself into his work at the advertising agency, while I continued managing my shop. We took pride in our relationship, understanding and respecting each other's work. On holidays, it became our routine to visit local antique markets together, searching for items for the shop. I still feel warmth in my heart remembering how we would get excited like children over our discoveries. In our garden, Thomas and I grew herbs together, enjoying fresh mint tea on holiday mornings. Though we weren't blessed with children, we cherished each other all the more. Our weekly brunch became an unwavering tradition. We would enjoy fresh seafood at Boston's famous Legal Seafoods while sharing the week's events. My relationship with my mother-in-law Martha deepened over the years. We had dinner together at least once a month, and my homemade apple pie became her favorite. "Jennifer, you're more wonderful than the daughter-in-law I could have hoped for," she would often tell me. Our days were filled with simple but genuine happiness. We would walk through Boston Common on holidays, enjoy shopping at the Prudential Center, and occasionally host barbecue parties for our neighbors. Each ordinary moment accumulated as irreplaceable memories. Recently, we had spent less time visiting antique markets and gardening, but I thought this was just a sign that our lives were fulfilling in other ways. Thomas's work had become busier, and he started working weekends more often, but I understood this was an important period for his career. These days continued until that fateful flight. I woke up earlier than usual on the morning of our flight to Miami. The clock showed 5 a.m., but the eastern sky was still dark, and I could hear early birds chirping faintly outside the window. I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake Thomas. The cold kitchen floor felt pleasant under my feet. First, I switched on Thomas's favorite coffee maker. The aroma of freshly ground dark roast coffee began to fill the quiet kitchen. As I started preparing breakfast, I thought about our plans. We were heading to Miami for Martha's 70th birthday party. She had moved to Miami last year, saying the warm climate was good for her health. Around the time I started frying bacon, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. "Good morning, Jenny," Thomas's voice rang out, unusually cheerful. He was already dressed in his suit, trailing a fresh scent of cologne. "Good morning. You're up quite early today," I said, to which Thomas replied with a smile, "It's Mother's birthday, after all." He came up behind me and gently kissed my shoulder. Though surprised by this uncommon gesture, I thought perhaps it was because it was a special day. I set the breakfast table with bacon and eggs, whole wheat toast, and a fruit salad. Unusually, Thomas repeatedly complimented my cooking, saying, "Delicious," several times. He was taking his time enjoying breakfast, unlike his usual rushed morning routine. After breakfast, we began our final packing. In front of the bedroom closet, we checked Miami's weather forecast while selecting appropriate clothes. "It looks like it'll be over 86 degrees this weekend," I said, and Thomas nodded while opening his suitcase. He carefully folded summer-appropriate clothes like white polo shirts and linen casual pants. When Thomas brought additional luggage from his study upstairs, I noticed several supplement bags in his hand. "I've started taking multivitamins recently," he explained, but I just smiled. He had become more health-conscious with age, so I didn't think much of it. Between packing, I double-checked the birthday present for my mother-in-law. The antique pearl necklace was a special piece we had found in our shop. The pearls had a deep luster that would surely complement Martha's elegant demeanor. I carefully placed the wrapped box in my handbag. At 8 a.m., we left the house as planned. The crisp autumn air enveloped us. On the drive to Boston Logan International Airport, Thomas cheerfully talked about Martha's present while driving. We had prepared the antique pearl necklace. The airport was already bustling with travelers when we arrived. We entered Terminal B and headed to the American Airlines check-in counter. While waiting in line, Thomas checked his smartphone several times, but I thought it might be work-related. At the check-in counter, Thomas suddenly said, "This suitcase might be too heavy." Indeed, his suitcase looked heavier than it appeared. "Jenny, would you mind if I move some things to your bag?" he suggested, and I agreed. In front of the baggage counter, Thomas carefully transferred items to my bag. He was putting supplements and several small items into my carry-on bag. The clerk proceeded with our check-in without paying particular attention. After passing through security and heading to the boarding gate, I felt like we brushed past someone in the crowd. It was a young woman in a flashy blouse, but in the busy airport, I didn't retain any other impression. With an hour until boarding, we headed to the airport lounge. Upon entering, comfortable leather sofas welcomed us in the subdued lighting. Thomas quietly opened his business newspaper, and I took out the mystery novel I had brought. From our window seats, we had a panoramic view of the vast runway. As I watched planes taking off one after another, my excitement grew for the upcoming days with my mother-in-law. I couldn't help but smile thinking about how happy Martha would be. The aroma of freshly ground coffee wafted from the lounge's coffee maker. Thomas ordered his usual black coffee. As I gazed at his profile, I wished this peaceful moment could last forever. While the typical airport bustle echoed in the distance, a strange quietness enveloped just our space. During boarding, we were directed to row 19. As I settled into my window seat, the peaceful time in the lounge still lingered in my mind. Thomas carefully stored my luggage in the overhead compartment before taking his aisle seat. As pre-takeoff announcements played, flight attendants began their final checks. Through the window, I could see ground staff bustling about. At that moment, I felt something odd about a resonant voice from the rear seats, but the thought was soon drowned out by the vibrations of takeoff. As the plane gained altitude, Boston's cityscape gradually grew smaller. Through breaks in the clouds, I could see our quiet residential neighborhood. The Charles River gleamed like a silver ribbon, and beyond it, Boston's skyscrapers beautifully reflected the morning sun. The blue horizon of the Atlantic was visible in the distance, and I couldn't help but sigh. Just as I was feeling happy to share such a wonderful view with Thomas, I noticed something slightly off about his behavior. The plane had reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign was off. Passengers were gradually relaxing, with quiet conversations starting here and there. The economy class cabin was softly lit, with sunlight streaming in, creating a pleasantly drowsy atmosphere. However, Thomas's restless demeanor seemed to strike a discordant note with this peaceful air. Usually, he would take out his laptop and start working right after takeoff, but today he seemed unsettled, frequently looking back. When I asked, "What's wrong?" he replied, "Just a habit," but his voice carried tension. As meal service began, I chose the chicken salad. Thomas said he wasn't hungry and ordered only water. Though the altitude had stabilized and the cabin was peaceful, something felt off. Suddenly, I sensed movement from behind. Looking back, I saw the young woman in the flashy blouse talking to a flight attendant. It was the woman I had glimpsed at the airport. There seemed to be something intentional about her expression. Shortly after, a large man in a black suit approached our seats. From his commanding presence, I immediately recognized him as a Federal Air Marshal. He looked at us with cold eyes and said in a low, controlled voice, "Who owns this bag?" The Air Marshal was pointing at my carry-on bag that Thomas had stored earlier. At that moment, Thomas's expression changed. With eyes colder than I'd ever seen and a slight smile, he pointed at me. "It's hers." His words rang out as if speaking about a stranger. The Air Marshal silently retrieved the bag and opened it on the spot. The next moment, I could see the color drain from his face. What came out were bags of white powder divided into small portions. I thought they were the supplements I had seen that morning, but the Air Marshal's expression grew increasingly stern. He slowly took out handcuffs while declaring in a clear voice, "You're under arrest." My mind went blank at those words. Wait, this must be some mistake. I desperately tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come together properly. Surrounding passengers watched the scene with bated breath. Thomas remained silent, seeming to distance himself slightly. Then I noticed the young woman from earlier watching the situation with a satisfied expression from the rear seats. There was something triumphant in her eyes. "This isn't mine." "Thomas, these are the things you put in my bag, aren't they?" I tried desperately to explain with a trembling voice. My throat was dry, and my heart was pounding violently. Cold sweat seeped from my palms, and I felt unsteady on my feet. The woman next to me covered her child's eyes, while a man turned away with a disgusted expression. The Air Marshal had already begun calling other security officers on his radio. He continued with procedures as if my voice couldn't reach him. The cabin atmosphere had completely changed, and the gazes of surrounding passengers pierced me like knives. A child's soft crying, someone's sigh, the sound of camera shutters, each one cut deeply into my heart. Outside the window, white clouds drifted quietly, and the sun shone brightly through. Its light reflected off the handcuffs, momentarily blinding me. The peaceful flight from just minutes ago had suddenly turned into a nightmare. Various thoughts swirled in my head: the peaceful breakfast table that morning, Thomas's gentle gestures at the airport, and now the reality unfolding before me. My vision gradually blurred. As tears rolled down my cheeks, I could barely stand as I heard the young woman's soft laughter from behind. At that moment, everything seemed to connect. This wasn't a coincidence or a mistake. It was a cruel trap, meticulously prepared without my knowledge. The cold handcuffs digging into my wrists forced me to accept this as reality. The air marshal guided me to the partition space at the rear of the cabin. As I walked down the aisle, the surrounding gazes pierced my entire body. A mother in a family group covered her young child's eyes, while businessmen turned away in disgust. I could see someone pointing a smartphone at me. "Please, this is a misunderstanding," I tried to explain with a trembling voice, but the words wouldn't come together properly. "This bag is indeed mine, but I know nothing about its contents." "Thomas, these are the things you put in this morning, aren't they?" When I turned back, Thomas's expression showed an unfamiliar coldness. "I don't know anything. You were supposed to be managing your own bag." His voice carried a cruelty I had never heard in our 10 years together. There was no trace of my usually gentle husband anywhere. In the rear partition space, another air marshal had already begun examining the evidence. The contents of my carry-on bag were being carefully removed one by one. First, I saw what I thought were the supplement bags from that morning. However, they were now white powder in small, translucent bags. The air marshal tested the powder with a special kit, his expression growing grimmer with each test. "These substances are strongly suspected to be illegal drugs," the air marshal's voice echoed in the narrow space. "And these drugs cannot be possessed without a doctor's prescription." As more evidence was discovered, my mind was caught in a whirlwind of confusion. Pills bottles without prescriptions, and thick envelopes containing large amounts of cash. All things I had never seen before. These are not mine," I forced out my voice, but by now, no one was willing to listen to my words. The air marshals continued methodically recording the evidence. At that moment, I looked up at a small laugh from the aisle. The young woman in the flashy blouse was watching the situation with a satisfied expression. Incredibly, Thomas was standing next to her. The two whispered to each other, occasionally glancing my way and nodding slightly. "That woman, who is she?" To my question, Thomas met my eyes for just a moment before looking away. That's when I noticed his wedding ring was missing from his left ring finger. The shock felt like an electric current running through my entire body. Among the passengers, various speculations had already begun circulating. Someone whispered, "Must be a drug dealer," while another anxiously suggested, "Could be a terrorist." Each comment deeply wounded my heart. The air marshal began making radio contact. I clearly heard the words, "We'll hand her over to the local Drug Enforcement Administration upon arrival at Miami International Airport." Outside the window, the sun had risen high, its bright light streaming into the cabin. That light felt ironically bright given my situation. Just hours ago, I had been full of excitement for my mother-in-law's birthday party. Now that hope felt like a shattered dream. As my vision blurred with tears, Thomas and the young woman returned to their seats. Watching their retreating figures, I desperately tried to recall if I had missed something in our married life. But all that came to mind were memories of happy days. Those memories made the current reality feel even more cruel. After arriving at Miami International Airport, events began moving in an unexpected direction. While I was being questioned in the airport's security area, a young police officer hurriedly entered the room. "We've checked the security camera footage," his voice contained obvious excitement. The footage showed the decisive moment at Boston's check-in counter where Thomas was putting something into my bag. Even more surprisingly, it captured him meeting the young woman outside the airport lounge. The two nodded as if confirming something, wearing satisfied expressions. During the subsequent investigation, the entire truth came to light. The woman's name was Rebecca Morrison, a new designer at Thomas's company with whom he had been having a secret relationship for a year, as revealed by their email exchanges. The plan had been meticulously prepared for 6 months. They intended to have me arrested on drug possession charges and use the chaos to start their new life together. The Air Marshal bowed deeply. "We sincerely apologize. This discovery has also led to the resolution of a larger case." During the investigation, the truth became clear. Thomas simply wanted a divorce. However, going through proper divorce proceedings would have meant dealing with property division and alimony issues. He had devised this plan to avoid that. When I said, "If you had complaints about me, you could have just told me directly," the investigator shook his head slightly. They had already rented an apartment and were preparing to live together. They planned to start their new life while you were under arrest. At the trial, the full extent of Thomas and Rebecca's despicable plan was revealed. The prosecution presented evidence including email records, bank transaction histories, and even audio recordings of their conversations. The defendant Thomas Adams executed this plan to frame his wife in order to prevent the discovery of his own illegal activities, the prosecutor's voice echoed in the courtroom. And in conspiracy with Rebecca Morrison, he attempted to profit enormously by selling company confidential information. Thomas's lawyer argued it was a temporary lapse in judgment, but the email records showed the plan had been meticulously prepared. Rebecca broke down crying in court, testifying that everything was under Thomas's direction. However, evidence was presented showing that she herself had actively participated in the plan. On the day of sentencing, the judge pronounced with a stern expression, "I hereby find defendant Thomas Adams guilty with a suspended sentence." While the act of attempting to frame another person deserves social condemnation, I have taken into account the defendant's apparent remorse and lack of prior criminal record. Rebecca, while charged as an accomplice, received a lighter sentence based on the determination that she had merely followed Thomas's instructions. I never received a direct apology from Thomas. In court, he only mumbled a single "sorry." Rebecca, on the other hand, sent a letter after the sentencing. In it, she wrote about how her ambition and jealousy were the root cause of everything, and expressed her regret for committing an unforgivable sin against me. That night, in a Miami hotel room, I sat face to face with Martha, Thomas's mother. Though deeply shaken by her son's actions, she held my hands firmly. "Jennifer, you've done nothing wrong." Martha's voice trembled but carried strong conviction. "What Thomas did is unforgivable, both as my son and as a human being. From now on, I'm on your side." Martha shared her own perspective on Thomas's motives. Since childhood, he was always expected to be perfect. His inability to accept failure might be the underlying cause of this incident. Her words were tinged with deep regret and self-reproach as a mother. Outside the window, Miami's night skyline sparkled brilliantly. The decorations for Martha's 70th birthday party in the room felt sadly ironic. At a time when we should have been sharing smiles as a family, we instead found ourselves at an unexpected turning point in our lives. "What do you plan to do now?" Martha quietly asked. At that question, I thought about my future for the first time. 10 years is not a short time. But surely not all of it had been in vain. "I'll continue with the shop," I answered, gazing out the window. "That place still holds my dreams. And I want to keep cherishing the joy of finding new treasures." A week after the sentencing, I returned to the shop. Sarah and the other employees welcomed me warmly. "We've all been waiting for the boss to come back." Sarah's words brought tears to my eyes. Martha promised to visit Boston regularly to see me. "I don't want to lose my bond with you because of my son's mistakes." Her words deeply moved me. The pearl necklace remains my treasure to this day. Rather than a symbol of painful memories, it has become a token of hope marking the beginning of a new life. Sometimes, while wearing this necklace, I reflect, life may take unexpected turns, but if you have the courage to overcome them, new paths will surely open up. To the media who seek interviews, I always give the same response: we can't change the past, but we can choose our future. Today, new items are again displayed in Little Treasures. Each antique has its own story. Perhaps my life has become like one of these antiques. Though damaged and having lost some things, it still maintains its unique value. On my last day in Miami, riding in the car to the airport, I made a quiet vow to myself. I won't look back anymore. I'll keep moving forward. And someday, I'll be able to proudly say that this experience has made me stronger. As the cityscape passed by the car window, a new page in my life was surely beginning to turn.